Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Lion and the Liverbird podcast. This is our second episode, our first
Woohoo!
episode.
Second episode.
Yeah, two episodes.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
double of one, I guess. If you liked our first episode, this is going to be more of kind of discussion on football and soccer. And what we are going to talk about today is just injury-prone players, right? There are so many players out there in the past and present who are just so prone to getting injured again and again. So we'll kind of get into it a little bit and discuss about what makes a player injury prone. What are the things that players have done in the past to come out of this kind of a rut, and just discuss some of the players that are currently out injured. And of course, I have with me Adim from Calcutta, who's a Liverpool fan. And sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Rohit. I'm a Chelsea fan. I'm calling in from Austin. And so, Adim, you want to say a few things about yourself, or just discuss something?
Oh yeah, no, I'll just start right off from the bat. So we're talking about injured players. The one player that most Liverpool fans, at least from the Jurgen Klopp era, will know about is Naby Keita.
Mhm.
So this guy was bought for quite a decent sum. We bought him actually a year in advance, so he was still playing at Leipzig. And he was a really good player at Leipzig. So we thought we'd got almost somebody who could take our midfield to the next level. He got the number 8 jersey, which everyone knows was Steven Gerrard's jersey. And it never really clicked for him. Now, whenever he came on the pitch, there were some good performances, but he was injured way too often. Like he would play 2 games and he's injured. He's playing a couple of games and he's injured. And this continued for his entire, I think, 4 year spell with us. And this was a surprise to many of us because he wasn't injured at Leipzig
Mm.
so consistently. Where the only consistent thing at Liverpool was that you knew he was injured. It was like a joke in all my Liverpool groups that, when will Naby Keita get injured or how will he get injured? Like, will he get off his bed and he'll get injured, or, did he pull his hamstring by just,
Yeah.
walking up the stairs or some shit like that? So that's the one player that really stands out. And now he's gone off, I think, to Werder Bremen and he's still picking up injuries.
Hmm.
So it's very strange as to how this suddenly developed for him. And I guess you also have one player right now who's going through
Oh
a
yeah.
similar situation.
Yeah, the Chelsea squad is devastated right now in terms of injuries. But a couple of questions for you about the Naby Keita thing. I remember when you guys signed Naby Keita, everybody else was really scared of what the Liverpool midfield is going to be because he came with such a big reputation. He was
Yeah.
technically good. He was physically strong. You're like, okay, I think these guys are going to dominate with him. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. So one of the questions I had was, you said he had a bunch of injuries, right? So were they recurrent injuries, the same injury again and again, or were there a whole like variety of injuries?
It was a variety of injuries. That's the funny part. So he had
Okay.
hamstring problems, he had calf problems, he had hip problems, he had some random problems. Like I remember there was one incident, I'm not quite sure. He was traveling or coming back from Africa, or he went to Africa and he picked up a random injury
Mm.
after the flight. And it's very strange as to how these injuries kept on happening. So it's not like the entire squad was picking up injuries constantly. Yeah, Jurgen Klopp. That is a discussion we'll have regarding Jurgen Klopp's training methods, etc. But Naby Keita was like, you're sure that he was gonna get injured. Like it
Yeah.
was like bingo. Like
Yeah,
we're just
yeah.
waiting for which part of the body is gonna get injured and why will he miss out.
Yeah, I can kind of see parallels with what's happening with Reece James right now, right? Reece James is Chelsea's captain,
Mhm.
of course. Mauricio Pochettino appointed him as captain. He is probably one of the right backs with the highest ceiling out there currently. Great, good in attack, good in defense, physically
Saying
strong.
Alexander Arnold. Sorry.
No, I'm saying one of them. I'm not saying he is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one
yeah,
who
yeah.
has, all of the.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
but for sure, right? I mean, a very well-rounded game. Better than Trent Alexander-Arnold in defense, much weaker in attack
Mm.
for sure. Uh, and he's essentially been plagued with injuries
Oh
for
yeah.
the last couple of years. He's barely had a consistent run at Chelsea. He's had a couple of really bad hamstring injuries right now, and he actually got his hamstring operated. And he's also kind of battling the mental side of it, right? You're kind of injured all the time, and then fans are not kind, right? Fans will say
Oh
things
yeah.
like, "Hey, this guy's not fit. He's overweight," and things like that. And so you can clearly see from his social media posts that he's not only fighting the physical aspect of it, but he's also fighting the mental aspect of it, which we'll talk as well. And Chelsea squad has so many more injuries right now. And Kunku is injured, Romeo Lavia is injured. Wesley Fofana has been injured for the longest time. So I think, yeah, like a lot of other teams, Chelsea is ravaged with injuries all over the pitch. So that's basically the motivation of why we want to talk about players who are injury prone and what kind of injuries do they have. So I think the first thing we wanted to discuss is the most common major injuries in soccer, right? We obviously
Yeah.
have the infamous ACL, right?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, once you mess up your ACL, there's usually surgery involved, a long period of recovery, so on and so forth.
And you're
The
never
yeah,
really back as the same player. I mean,
true.
that's one thing. After an ACL, like most people believe that's the end of your, I wouldn't say career, but the end of that stage of your career.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
most people believe that you don't have that explosive pace anymore, and you're
Yes.
scared
Yeah,
that
yeah,
another
yeah.
similar injury, and then you're done.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very good point, right? Your explosive pace goes away, and a lot of players depend exclusively on that, right? Their pace, and once
Yeah.
that goes, either they adapt or they just fade away.
hmm
Apart from the ACL, of course, the hamstring, which Reece James is suffering from, that's a muscle injury. Seems like it's recurrent, and I don't know whether surgeries can fix it. Let's see whether Reece James can make a comeback. There's of course the Achilles tendon, the groin, ankle, so on and so forth. And then of course there are a whole range of collision-based injuries, right? The head injuries from which Petr Cech, Raul Jimenez, and all of these guys suffered from, right? And I
Yeah.
think we're also talking about CTE, right? One of the
Yeah.
uh, you know results of repeated head injuries. And you were saying something about how CTE has affected like youth soccer in the UK and things like that.
Correct. So a lot of the places now, they don't allow the children to head the ball. That wasn't the case earlier, but now they're actually taking measures to ensure that, until you're a certain age, there isn't that part where you're heading the ball. So I know in America, the big discussion about CTE goes mostly with the NFL. And I see, I still can't understand some of the tackles per se that go to these games where you basically got the person who's wearing the helmet, like the defenseman. He runs into the offensive player with his head like it's like a missile, and it's so strange as to why they do that. So yeah, in football it isn't that prevalent because you're heading a ball, you're not actually in a collision with another person. But yeah, in American football, I completely see why a lot of people are writing and speaking about it, because that is
Yeah.
a major issue there.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so many people who've been posthumously diagnosed with CTE because that's
Mhm.
something you can only diagnose after somebody dies because you actually have to cut into the brain and everything. There's also, of these collision injuries, there's also a psychological aspect that we'll talk about, right? Because, once you get an
Mhm.
injury that's that serious, you're just scared. And how do you, get out of it? How do you regain your confidence and things like that? So, we talked about a whole variety, whole string of injuries that players seem to get afflicted by. And talking about these players, some of the most famous players who've been out injured or whose careers have been destroyed by injuries. I think Abu Diaby of Arsenal come to
Oh
mind.
yeah,
That
yeah. No, so
uh,
that's the one thing. So there are a lot of people who believe, and a lot of the Premier League fans who watched the Arsenal of that time, they knew that Abu Dhabi was an exceptional player.
mhm,
Uh, but it's just that he was never able to reach a consistent level
yep,
because of the injuries, like the Naby Keita issue. But obviously, Abu Dhabi was, I think, a little bit better whenever he
mhm,
did perform for Arsenal.
yeah,
The other player that we were discussing about the other day was obviously Jack Wilshere.
yes,
He had almost everything that you need
yeah,
in a quality midfield, and
mhm,
it just never clicked for him for whatever reason it was.
yep, yep.
I mean, yeah, obviously injuries, but
Mhm.
that's the thing.
Yeah, we were also looking at a list of the most injured players over the last decade or so, right? And we found
Yeah,
something interesting. Of course, Abu Dhabi is there, Jack Wilshere is there, but there are also players like Arjen Robben and Frank Ribery who, in hindsight, we think of them of having had very successful careers, right? Both of them, Ribery
yeah,
and Robben. So I think that goes to also show that even if you were plagued with injuries, what you do in between the those periods when you're fit, can kind of also defines your legacy. That's a interesting insight we got by looking at just the names on there, right?
yeah. So it's interesting that list has also Vincent Kompany there.
Yeah, yeah,
He's done amazingly well for Manchester
yeah.
City, of course. The other person, obviously, over there that really stood out is Ronaldo, the original one.
Original
Now, most
Ronaldo.
of us know about original Ronaldo because of his knee injury at
Mhm,
Inter Milan. I
mhm.
think he had one at Barcelona also. I'm not quite sure about that. But yeah, you're right about the point about Robin and Ribery. I think they picked up a lot of injuries in between, but I don't know how long they were out for. But when they were playing, like you knew they're gonna be really good. You know that
Yeah.
Arjen Robin was going to cut in on his left and he's just gonna smack it and curl it in.
Yeah.
That's like a one-trick pony,
Yep.
but he was so damn good at it. Like you
Yes.
just knew he's gonna do that.
Yeah.
And even Ribery, you knew what he
Mhm.
was gonna do, but they
Ribery
was
was so
just
good.
so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were just so good at what they do that you just could not defend them. So it's
Yep.
very interesting that that list had those two names. Of course, it had some other names like Stefan Jovetic. Jovetic was
Yeah.
expected to be an amazing talent.
Mhm,
We did that podcast the earlier day about young players who could not reach their potential. Jovetic is one.
mhm.
There was a lot really expected from him. And the other names on that list were Thomas Vermaelen. So yeah, I mean Arsenal, Barcelona, but okay.
Forgettable
Marco
name. Yeah.
Reus. Marco Reus
Yeah.
might
Marco
not have
Reus.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's the most unlucky player with injuries. I think
Yes.
he's
Agreed.
missed almost every World Cup
Yeah.
and
Yep.
Euro with
Yep.
Germany.
Yep.
And the other one is also Holger Badstuber. So again, a lot was expected from him also at Bayern, but
Hmm, hmm.
he's just also faded away, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's interesting. You have players whose potential clearly hasn't been reached, and then you have some who have reached their potential, even though they were
Mm.
plagued with injuries. So talking about these players who have been injured a lot, of course, we need to talk about the other side of the coin, right? Players who are never injured. And that ties into a previous podcast, right? We were just talking about how Mohamed Salah is always available. He's never injured. He's just so resilient.
I got news for you. He just picked up an injury at
Uh,
AFCON. It's
he's gonna get
incredible.
over it.
We jinxed him, it seems, man, or something like that for sure.
It's a powerful
So yeah,
podcast.
oh yeah. So yeah, that's what we're saying. So Liverpool were lucky during the Jurgen Klopp era to have two players like Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane,
Mhm.
who were never injured. Like they were always there, available all the time. And the funny thing is that while Mane would get substituted from time to time, Salah always plays the 90. Like you'll rarely see him being subbed off. And it's insane as to how strong and physically fit he is, because you just don't get that these days in this world of football. Now football has changed completely to what we used to watch 20 years back.
Yeah.
So 20 years back we had discussed this, that you pass the ball to Ronaldinho, he'll do some tricks and he'll create something.
Yeah.
Right now there are so many different formations, tactics, strategies. You're running at a much faster level, you're doing much more things more quickly, you don't have time to think. There's just so much going on
Yeah.
that it's
This.
incredible that someone like a Salah doesn't get injured. So the funny thing about his injury also is that initially it was reported for Egypt during the AFCON that he had pulled his hamstring. Now all of a sudden they're saying no, it's not a hamstring, his lower back is injured. So there
Okay.
is some kind of a confusion as to what is injured.
I think he
Liverpool
just doesn't want.
fans, no, no,
He
see,
just
no,
doesn't
no,
want to play the league stage games, man. That's all.
yeah, possibly. So Liverpool fans believe that Egypt are possibly lying because if
Mm.
it's a hamstring injury, that's 2 to 3 weeks as a bare minimum, whereas it's a lower back strain, you can just say a couple of, maybe a week
Ah,
max.
okay,
But
okay,
if
that
you,
way, got it.
yeah, but if you play with a injured hamstring and you do what Reece James has done, then
Yeah,
you're out for
yeah.
longer, man.
True,
So I
true.
don't know, man. Fingers crossed. Let's see what happens with Salah.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully he comes back and you guys give Man City a good run for their money this time. Uh,
Hopefully.
I think apart from Salah in the current era, right? Bruno Fernandes is another name.
Hmm.
He is
Yeah,
again
yeah,
so injury resistant. He just plays all the games and he seems to have no issues at all. And then since we talked about the OG Ronaldo, we've got to talk about CR7, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
Messi as well. Both CR7 and Messi. I don't think they would have been in the contention for being the goats if they weren't as fit throughout their careers, right? They rarely
Correct.
had major injuries that sidelined them for a long period of time.
So it's very interesting you talk about CR7 and Messi. They're built in different ways. If you see Ronaldo now compared to his Manchester United days, he's built like a freaking brick wall, man. I mean,
Mhm.
he's shredded and he looks so muscular. Whereas Messi has never looked, muscular.
Yeah,
He's quick, and you see these compilations on YouTube, right? The tackles he's had to deal with. I mean, some of them from Sergio Ramos during the Barca Real days.
true, true, true.
And you just get up and walk off. It's like
Yeah,
I don't know how he's superhuman.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
Ronaldo, yeah, I mean, he also got tackled like a lot in the Premier League. But even he would just, oh, fine, he would roll around a little bit, obviously. But he would still just walk off and he's like, he's available. So I think it's testament to both the players. I think Messi is a genetic freak,
yeah. That's a
whereas
good
Ronaldo
point.
he
Yeah,
has
yeah,
worked hard to be what he is now. I think
yeah.
that's important to note.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I think yeah, Messi is obviously fit as well, right? But I think that the fact that he's physically quite different, and you'd
Hmm.
assume somebody of that short stature to get injured, especially when you're being tackled mercilessly, but that doesn't happen. That's a good segue into our next point, right? We wanted to discuss what makes a player injury prone, and these two distinct examples of two players who have very different playing styles, very different physicalities, just goes to show that there are a whole gamut of reasons why somebody might be injury prone or somebody might not be
Hmm.
injury prone. I think the first couple of aspects that we wanted to talk about were obviously the physical aspects, physical fitness, conditioning, how much they weigh, what their muscle mass is. Essentially, you want to be strong, you want to be fit, but you don't want to be bulky, right? In soccer,
Right.
because you're
Yeah.
running around so much, you're changing your direction so much. And then talking about the physical aspect of it, right? You were telling me about the story of Jordan Henderson and Sir Alex. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there was this quote that was taken out a while back. So if you've seen Jordan Henderson run, he runs in a very distinct manner. So it's very weird as to the way he runs. So there was talk about Jordan Henderson possibly ending up working with Sir Alex or maybe ending up at Man United. And at that time, Sir Alex had said that one of the reasons why they did not sign him was because of the way he ran. So this was obviously during his Sunderland days, and then when they got relegated, he was going to move, etc. The thing that stood out was that they were afraid, Manchester United and Sir Alex were afraid that later on it would cause problems for Henderson, which means obviously he would be injured and there could be other issues. But we took a punt on him and he led us to the Premier League title basically.
Yep, for
And he
sure.
wasn't injured all that often for us. Sure, there were a few niggles here and there. That's there with almost every player. But that was never a problem for us. I mean, there was never like he's been injured or his back is injured because of the way he runs. He is there always time. And he did not have a role like we were discussing. It wasn't a role where he was just standing in the middle of the park and not doing
No,
anything.
very
So
dynamic
the
one, right?
Liverpool, yeah, the Liverpool midfield under Klopp has always been very dynamic. So
Hmm.
he was there, Giorgino, while Naldum was there, and obviously Fabinho. The two of them, Wijnaldum and Henderson, would keep running around. In fact, during the latter stage of his career, also Henderson was actually almost moving into the right wing role, allowing Salah to cut in, and he was going up and down the right wing a lot. So that just goes to show that there are certain how would you call it? There are certain things that people look into before making a signing, but it doesn't really work out always like that. So Henderson at Man United could have been a possibility, but Sir Alex didn't take the risk because of the possibility of injury.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting, right? So that just goes to show that there's a lot more to kind of discover and learn here,
Oh yeah. So
right?
that's
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to discuss, bring up. Yeah, exactly. So sports science has also evolved so much in these
Mhm.
2, 3 decades. I mean, when we started watching football, I don't think anybody would have thought that so much will go into it. Now you've got these
Yeah,
lactate tests and
yeah,
you've got all these other different tests. There was this amazing Wolves documentary I was speaking to you about that right after the match, all the players are thrown into an ice bath just to stop the injuries or help the recovery and all. Now this is something that was alien to most football teams, I believe, 20, 30 years ago. But sports science is developing so quickly that you have to have sports science because of the amount of games that we're playing nowadays and the amount of travel that there is.
yeah, yeah. And theoretically speaking, the advances in sports science should enable these number of injuries to show a downward trend. But on the flip side of the coin, you kind of touched upon it. There's so many matches these days. Players are like being kind of run through the ringer due to excessive games, not enough time to cool down. So you never know what's going to happen. But for sure, the biomechanics and all of these the research areas have expanded so much and for the good, right? So I think hopefully at least we'll see some of
Yeah,
the players. Yeah,
the game has changed also
absolutely.
dramatically.
Yep, yep.
It's completely different to what it was a while back.
Yes,
So
that's
there's
an
there's
interesting
so
thing.
much going on, man. It's
Yeah.
insane as to how the game has become more explosive.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to point out, right, when we're talking about somebody like Jordan Henderson, he just seems like a robust and strong guy. I don't know whether that has anything to do with it. Some of the other players who do get injured do seem a little fragile. That might just be, conjecture, but that's just something that comes to my mind. And then talking about Jordan Henderson and the way he runs. I mean, of course, a player's playing style and playing position also has an influence on how much they get injured. If somebody rushes into a tackle a lot, if somebody likes to kind of do these explosive sprints. Of course, if you're on the wing, like Reece James is a wing back, those two are also factors that go into play, right? Certain positions are better if you are injury prone, and I think we talked about players having to change their playing style, maybe also change their playing position. I don't know.
Yeah. So one prime example of somebody suffering an ACL and actually becoming just as good as he was before, if not better, is Alessandro Del Piero, the Italian legend, World Cup winner, won several titles with Juventus. So he did pick up an ACL injury, and at that time he was like a proper striker for them. But as we had discussed, once you pick up that ACL injury, that speed, that burst of speed, that explosiveness is just gone. So instead of playing that same the lone striker position, what he did was he withdrew himself. He sometimes played out in the wing or sometimes just behind the striker. That pace wasn't there, but he was still just as good as he was before. He was scoring goals for fun. He was taking free kicks. Del Piero was just amazing even after the injury. The same goes to say about Ruud van Nistelrooy. Now, obviously, Ruud van Nistelrooy was never somebody who had that pace. He was always a fox in the box kind of thing, and his finishing was almost second to none. But even he, after that ACL injury, he was still just as good as he was before. He was still scoring goals. I think he moved from United to Real Madrid. So obviously, moving from one big club to another big club does show that he still had something in him. So that's just an example of players deciding to make changes about their playing styles, just to ensure that they have a longevity, but also ensuring that they are impactful and they
Yeah.
can do what they were doing.
Yep, yep, yep. I think for that to happen, player has to have multiple skills that they can bank on, right? So on top of speed, you should have good technical ability, you should
Mhm.
have good vision, should have good understanding of the game. But that's definitely one of the things that you could do,
I think
change your
management
playing style.
also obviously plays a role in that because
Hmm.
the manager has to come out and say
Yep,
that, okay, you're not going to be able to do this anymore.
yep, yep,
So you
yep.
should do this, and maybe this is something you can work with.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's another good segue into talking about how much the manager's playing style or the manager's training style influences players getting injured. Of course, somebody like Jurgen Klopp, right? He expects his players to, be running around throughout the game, closing people down immediately,
Yeah.
high intensity, Gegenpress football, and all of that. And then, that has to have some effect. What do you think?
Yeah, that does. So we've had our fair share of injuries during Klopp's reign. Um, So earlier, I remember the first couple of seasons, there were a lot of players picking up injuries. Now that's because of two reasons. One is obviously they're getting accustomed to a new system where he wanted us to press, and we were pressing a hell lot more than we are doing right now. So earlier, I remember there was this crazy pressing right from the first whistle,
Yeah, I
and
remember.
obviously the players had to train and understand and take their bodies to that kind of a fitness level which wasn't there.
So sorry to
So
interrupt you. Why did he pull back on that? Why did he decrease like the amount of pressing?
I think it's one obvious reason could be the injuries. The
Okay.
other is I think he likes to have his team. He likes to have a small team. He doesn't like to use too
Got it.
many players from time to time.
Hmm.
So I think he's finally understood that if I push them constantly, they will break.
Hmm.
So now you'll see that our presses happen sporadically, but when they do, obviously they are very effective. But this obviously makes sense, and you'll see that our midfield also has changed completely this season.
Right.
So last season also, I think our presses came down simply because the likes of Henderson, Fabinho, and Naby Keita, whoever was the third midfielder, the midfield was non-existent for us
Hmm.
because obviously age had got into them, their legs had gone, whatever. Now we've got a completely fresh new midfield. You'll see it's a little bit more pressing.
Hmm.
But I think Jurgen Klopp finally understood that you can't keep pushing them because we're not going to be signing seven new players every year. It's
Got
like
it.
one or two at the most, maybe three. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Of course. So I think that's a good point, right? A manager actually changing, his style of play depending upon external factors. I think that's also something that we will be talking about in one of our episodes. So I think, yeah, that covers most of the conventional, reasons that might make somebody injury prone, the physical aspect of it, the playing position, playing style. There were some, reasons that I found online out little of the left field, so to speak. One was genetics. Apparently, there's some gene mutation that might make your ligaments more brittle.
Wow.
The more interesting one that we talked about a little bit was the psychological aspect of it,
Yeah.
right? Mental resilience, the ability to actually make a comeback from an injury, or something like impaired decision making. If you're not completely in the game, if your mind is elsewhere, if you have some issues going on mentally, you might make the wrong decision. You might stretch too much or go into a tackle you should not have. And then we were also discussing about Daniel Sturridge, right, and
Yeah.
Jurgen Klopp. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Sturridge is one player who's played for both Chelsea and Liverpool, and he's played for quite a few other clubs. Now, a lot of Liverpool fans do consider him as one of the best finishers we've ever had. I think he could have been one of the greats of English football had he been fit.
Mhm.
The problem was that he is another example of a player who always seemed to pick up an injury, and he was never there. So the one season where he was fit for quite a long time was that glorious 2013 season with Luis Suarez, where we almost won the title, and he was scoring goals from the most ridiculous angles. So the thing was that Jurgen Klopp obviously kept him for a while before he was allowed, because he was sold, I believe, or he was released. And Jurgen Klopp had this quote that, Daniel Sturridge needs to learn the difference between pain and serious pain, where he was alluding to the fact that, maybe he isn't that injured, and maybe it's a bit of a mental block because he's not going onto the pitch, and that's why he's not willing to play. Now, obviously, this is something that we've spoken about, where the mind plays a huge role into how you feel. The placebo effect is just a perfect example of that. So that is certainly a huge factor
Yeah.
in all of this.
Yeah, I think especially if you've had a major injury, right? I think the psychological aspect comes into play. Even a small niggle, you're always scared. You're always scared about, you kind of that injury recurring. And so sometimes that barrier becomes too much to overcome. And along the similar line, somebody probably who was able to overcome a mental barrier is somebody like Petr Cech, right? He had a
Oh
really
yeah,
bad
oh yeah,
injury to his head. Then he came back. He started wearing a protective headgear, the headgear that folks wear in rugby, and then that helped him get over his fears, and that helped him be more assured. And he went on to have an illustrious career even after that injury. So that's an interesting part, right? The kind of a holistic
so Czech
view. Yeah.
was a little bit more I would say, certain of not picking up another head injury because he had that protective
Yes. Very
gear.
true.
That
Yeah.
obviously gave him a bit of more confidence,
Yep.
because the goalkeeper's role is a lot different. He has to run and collect the ball, and he's actually diving at players' feet. I think that's how he got injured at Reading.
Yes. Yeah.
So he was hit by, I think, Hunt's foot. I can't remember. But yeah, so obviously that gave him a bit more confidence. But yeah, no doubt he had an
Yeah.
amazing career even after the injury.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really important point, right? How assured is the player that he's not going to get injured again? I think that
Yeah.
comes down to obviously the medical staff, but then also there's some psychological coaching and training to be done there. There's no question about that, right?
Ah,
Yeah. So we were talking about what can a player do to avoid injury or to come back from a recurrent injury, and is there any hope for somebody like Reece James, right? And one of the things that we talked about was changing the playing style or changing the playing
yeah.
position.
Yeah, so that's something that he'll have to look into. I think obviously the mental aspect is there, because he has to have the confidence that, I can play or I can do what I want to do on the pitch. But there could be a decision that Mauricio Pochettino has to take as to how I'm going to employ or apply Reece James on the field. Like, do I move him into midfield? Do I give him a more
Possible.
defensive position in midfield? Like Trent plays a quarterback kind of role.
Yep.
So can Reece James do that? Obviously, Pochettino will know, and maybe you will be better placed to know because of his creativity.
Yep.
But again, that's something that Pochettino. So we've seen Alessandro Del Piero do that. He changed his positioning and all, and he was just as effective as he was earlier. Reece James, yeah, I think time will tell, but he first needs to get back to full fitness. I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah. I
most
think
important
yeah,
thing right now.
that's the important part here, and then we'll see if whatever his surgery can help, and then we talked about the physical aspect of it, the medical science behind sports. It has gone on to advance so much. Whether that can help him in some way, it hasn't been successful so far, but we'll see. I think the last thing we wanted to talk about in this episode was, while recruiting players, how much importance should be given to past injuries. Because we've talked about some players like Naby Keita who had a pretty clean injury record, right? In
Yep.
those cases, you really can't do anything. It's probably down to bad luck or his body breaking down. But then, there's instances where, Chelsea currently have forked up over 150 million pounds on players who are young, but they've had a pretty checkered past in terms of injuries, right? Wes Fofana is somebody Chelsea bought for a lot of money, and he's been injured for most of the time. Romeo Lavia, he's very young, but he also had his issues with injuries, and he barely played like 15 minutes. And Nkunku as well. So basically, the question is, how much importance should be given to past injuries, and is enough importance given right now?
So I'm really shocked at the West Fofana signing because I think you told me that he picked up that major injury well before
Yeah.
Chelsea signed him.
Yep. At
So
Leicester.
most of the times, at least from Liverpool's point of view, is that we avoid players who have injury histories or who are close to failing the metric. I remember we were close to signing Nabil Fekir,
Mm-hmm.
and apparently the deal didn't go through because of some knee issue that came up. Later on, it was found out that there was some nonsense going on with his agent and he wanted some more money or something like that. But that was what the story was initially. So I think major clubs do a proper checkup and they see that, oh, this player has these kind of injuries and we're not going to take him up. So I'm quite surprised as to why Chelsea moved for Fofana. In Kunku one, I think it's a little weird because he picked up the
Yeah.
injury just before the World Cup,
Yeah,
was it?
that's true.
Yeah, just before the World Cup, and he was flying at
Yeah.
Leipzig. I mean, he was amazing at Leipzig. And Chelsea had signed him also before the World Cup. I remember it was
Yeah.
during the December window or something like that. So that's just bad luck for Chelsea. Lavia, we were discussing before the podcast that he was played quite a lot by Southampton, and that could be a reason why he got injured or he picked up this serious injury,
Yeah.
similar to what we did with Stefan Bajetic.
Yep.
Last season, we used him a lot when he was just developing. He's also a teenager, and he's been out for us. He hasn't played a single minute, I believe, or maybe he has played one or two games for us, but he just hasn't been playing regularly because I believe that these kids are still,
Yeah.
getting accustomed to playing so many games. That's why you don't push them into the first team at such a young age. So
Yep.
it's weird. It's just bad luck for Chelsea from some points. But then obviously there are questions to be asked about the
Oh,
Fofana
absolutely.
one,
Yeah. Yeah. I
because
totally
it's
agree
shocking.
with the Romeo Lavia and the Bajetic one, right? If you're young at that age, when you're 17, 18,
Mm,
19, if you're being pushed to play too many games, that can obviously, have an effect on your physical well-being,
yeah.
and you can get injured and so on and so forth. So yeah, I hope Chelsea have folks who are looking into the past injury record of folks of players that they're spending a lot of money on, and I really hope all of these guys, including Reece James, Wesley Fofana, they're young players who are extremely talented. Hopefully they can go along the route of Arjen Robben and not Jack Wilshere, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's strange. Yeah, let's see. Let's see.
Yep.
There's still time. So yeah, Chelsea. I mean, I think this will be like a central theme to end all our podcast discussions. Like,
Yeah.
what are Chelsea doing?
It's
What have they
mostly
done?
me crying about everything.
Like, what is going on? What is this?
I think yeah, we can rename the podcast "Rohit Cries About
Yeah,
Chelsea."
we should rename it as what is Chelsea doing or what have Chelsea done?
Oh boy, oh boy. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. And again, like I said in the last episode, if you liked our conversation, please like and subscribe and share this video with all your friends. Let us know your comments, of course,
Yeah.
and also if you have ideas of things that we should be discussing, let us know as well. Again, thank you for listening to us.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
All right. Bye bye.